One will not be enough.
Hello, but don't forget now you have this guy here. You have Mendy here.
Move it around. I need to put it up on the chair or something. No?
The words of the Tzemach Tzedek come to mind. Machda Eretz Yisrael, we need to make Eretz Yisrael here. And the question is, what does that mean? How do we make Eretz Yisrael here? There are a lot of explanations. But one of them is we really understand now that in order for a country to do well, its borders need to be secure. The enemy cannot be allowed in any way, shape, or form. And the entire country, the security and the borders have to be complete. And the same thing is true of our own environment. We need to make an Eretz Yisrael in our own homes and in our own communities, and all the people that we interact with. We need to ensure that this is a place which is devoted exclusively to Hashem, Eibishter, Torah, mitzvahs, and Chassidus, and that there is no room for any, so to speak, enemy movement. And of course, that is one big hachana that we can do in order to ensure that we achieve this on the world stage. Perhaps we can connect this to an interesting sikha I saw recently, where the Rebbe discusses a minig that we are all familiar with. When Jews come together, and there's a question if we have enough people for a minyan. We need 10 people, but we cannot count. So what do? We use a pasuk, which contains 10 words. And this minig is first described in Sefer Apardos of Rashi. And he says, you point and you count. Va'ani b'roiv chazdecha, avei veisecha, eshtachve el heichal kodshecha b'yirasecha. And I, out of your great kindness, I come before you in your sanctuary, and I bow towards your holy sanctuary in awe of you, in awe of Hashem. And the question is, how did that minig evolve into something else? Where in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, it says that when 10 people come together several hundred years later, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says that the minig is we count Hoshia es Amecha, Uvarech es Nachlasecha, Urein v'nasem ad ha'olam. Save your people and bless your heritage, sustain them and raise them forever. And the Rebbe explains in that sikha that in times bygone, many hundreds of years ago, when Jews came together, the thing that was uppermost in their mind is Shul, Beis Medrash, connection with Hashem. However, as we progress through Galus and things become more and more difficult, more and more tough, when Jews gather together, the first thing we can think of is Hoshia Samecha. We daven to Hashem, save us, and already take us out of this Galus. So on that note, I think it is very appropriate that tonight we begin the Farbrengen with Emeritus Tehillim, with saying Tehillim, and we're going to recite together 3 kapitlach, kapitel Chaf, kapitel Kuf Chaf Gimmel, and kapitel Kuf Nun. And I would like to call upon Rabbi Chaim Tzvi Groner to lead us with the first pasuk, the first kapitel Chaf.
Lamnatseach mizmer leDavid, Yan chadinoi b'yom tzara yisagev chashem el Yaakov, Yishlach ezrecha mikodesh u'mitzion yisadeka, Yizker kol min chaysecha v'yilascha yidash nesela, Yiten lecha chilvavecha v'chalatzascha yimalei, Neranenu b'shuasecha v'shem eleinu nidgoel, Yimalei adinoi kol mishalisecha, Ato yodati ki yeshi adinoi mishicha ya'aneu mishmei kodshei b'gvurois yeshe yiminoi. Ein levarecha ve'elevasusim v'anachnu b'shem adinoi eleheinu nazkir. Hein v'akoru v'nafalo v'anachnu kamru v'nis'eidod adinoi heishia. Hamelech ya'aneinu v'yem kodeinu.
Rabbi Telsner, kapitel Kuf Chaf Gimel.
Shir Amaloi, Selechanos Yeseini, Ainai, Ayeshi Bashomoyim. Hinechei, Neavodim, Adadineihem, Kene Shiv, Choliat Virto, Kineino, Ladineleino, Achichoneino, Choneino, Adinchoneino, Kirav Sovano Buz, Abasovolo Nafsheino, Alaga Shana, Nim Habuz, Ligienim.
Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Gutnik, kapitel Kuf Nun.
Hallelujah, hallelujah, Kodshe, hallelujah, B'kiruzeh, hallelujah, B'gvreisov, hallelujah, Krev Gudloi, hallelujah, B'sekel Shefa, hallelujah, B'nev V'chine, hallelujah, B'sefer Mochel, hallelujah, B'mini B'ugav, hallelujah, B'seselei Shama, hallelujah, B'seselei Sruah, Kel, Hamishomet, hallelujah, hallelujah.
Tonight, or today, is 30 years Shloshim Shana. Personally, my mind is cast back to Tafshin und Dalet. In the aftermath of Gimmel Tammuz, one of the things I remember as a young teenager was a gaggle of reporters and journalists who were there in the forecourt of Sydney's Yeshiva Center, and they were interviewing a group of rabbis and asking all kinds of questions that many of us in this room would probably regard to be somewhat inane, such as, who's the next Rebbe? How long will the movement last? What's the prospects for the future? Bashgacha Pratis, someone sent me a video today of an event that I participated in. It was advertised at the time as the Shloshim. It was at the beginning of Menachemov in Sydney, and looking at the video 30 years later, you cannot deny and escape the feeling of melancholy, the feeling of sorrow, the feeling of solemnity at this event. And the keynote speaker at the time was Rabbi Chaim Gutnikol of Asholem, who traveled from here, from Melbourne to Sydney. And the theme of his talk, the theme of his presentation, was to speak about that, of course, there will be a hemshech, there must be a hemshech, there must be a continuation. And with his great eloquence, he spoke about this idea, but you could see the struggle in trying to understand how is this going to play out. It's interesting that a couple of weeks ago I heard a story which was shared by Rabbi Shabtai Slavatitsky, who's the Shliach of the Rebbe in Antwerp. And he recounted that in the days after Gimmel Tammuz, he was summoned to the offices of one of the leaders in the town, a Rabbi by the name of Rabbi Weiss, who later on went to become became an Av Beis Din in the Eda Charedis in Eretz Yisrael. And when he came and sat down at this meeting, what Rabbi Weiss wanted, he was a big admirer of the Rebbe. And he told Rabbi Slavatitsky he was concerned about it all falling apart. And he was trying to impress upon Rabbi Slavatitsky the imperative, we must appoint someone else to continue the Avodah. How's Rabbi Slavatitsky going to explain to a non-chassid that this is just not even imaginable? Anyway, some time passes, and Rabbi Yoel Kahn, Olav Hasholem, was visiting Antwerp in order to give a shiurim of Chassidus. And when he was there, Rabbi Weiss asked Rabbi Slavatitsky if you could please arrange an appointment, another meeting. So Rabbi Yoel Kahn dutifully went, and after the meeting he shared with Rabbi Slavatitsky that what Rabbi Weiss wanted. He says, you're the chayz of the Rebbe, you're the one who's privy to the deepest teachings. Perhaps it's incumbent upon you to take on the leadership. And of course, we know that that wasn't even a thought. 5 years later, Rabbi Slavatitsky was visiting the home of Rabbi Weiss, unfortunately for a tragedy, Rahman al-Litzlan. And Rabbi Weiss pulled him into the kitchen and said to Rabbi Antwerp, I want to give you a shlichus. What's the shlichus? I would like you that next time you go to New York and you buy the oil, I'm giving you my name and my mother's name. I would like to ask that you should seek forgiveness, mechila, for things that I've said. And Rabbi Weiss said, and Rabbi Slavatitsky said, what do you mean? You're a big admirer of the Rebbe, a big supporter of Chabad. What do you have to ask forgiveness for? See, he said, because I completely miscalculated and misjudged what a Rebbe is. 5 years ago, after the events of Gimmel Tammuz, I'm thinking about we must create something new in order to persist. And look how wrong I see that I've been. And that was 5 years later, and of course when we look 30 years later, it's completely obvious, completely clear and simple about how the Rebbe's koiches and the Rebbe's influence lives on. But as Chassidim, as we stand Shloshim Shana, we know that the Rebbe would not want that the focus of the Farbrengen was to pat ourselves on the back and to herald our achievements, but to think about where we go weiter. And I believe that Shloshim Shana creates or includes, it has a challenge. And that is because we know in Tanya and in other sources, it describes one of the failings of human nature is a hergel nasis teva. That things that you become accustomed to, you become a condition to it. A situation which at one point you thought was completely unfathomable. There is just no way, but time does its thing. And 30 years later, it could be that we become somewhat resigned or comfortable with the situation. And as always, we look to the teachings of the Rebbe, and as I'm sure many in this room have done, the Rebbe has spoken about the significance of Shleishim Shana in the year Tavshin Mem, and I'd like to share just 1 point or 2 points from a series of sichos that the Rebbe had on this topic. The Rebbe started off in that sicha started off that part of the sicha by noting the Hebrew word Shana. The Hebrew word Shana, year, is also connected to the idea of repetition. Like, for example, in the phrase Chayzev V'nishna, something repeats. Shana, we think about year in, year out, and we go through the same motions, this Pesach, Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, all the same events we do year after year. However, the word Shana also has the lashon of shinui, to change. And we know that Chassidus explains that this is a challenge, that we approach the new year, and what do we see? Chayzev V'nishna. We see that we're repeating the repetition. But that's just a facade. It's really an opportunity for a shinui, to change. It's time for us to change, as the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, that we have new koiches on a higher level every single year. In the Sikha, where the Rebbe speaks about this in Tavshin Mem, the Rebbe continues that this challenge we have is every year, but then this becomes magnified many times over when we come to Shleishim Shana. Because Shleishim Shana is a special time. The Rebbe invoked the pasuk at the beginning of Sefer Yecheskel, Vayihi b'Shleishim Shana, was in the 30th year. Yecheskel is the very start of the Sefer. Niftachu Hashemayim, the heavens opened, ve'era maris elikim, and I saw a vision of Hashem. And he goes on to describe the Merkava coming to the crowning moment. V'ala kisei dzmus kamari Adam, that Yecheskel, a mortal, sees on the throne, on the Kisei HaKavod, you have a dzmus kamari Adam, the Adam Kadmon, the level of the Elokus, godliness. And how did he achieve that? The Rebbe discusses how the number 30 is connected to Ben Shleishim L'Koyach. We have a lot of Koyach. And one of the challenges with Koyach is its reminiscence of a pasuk, Koyichi va'otzem yadi. Many times when we feel that we have the power, we have the strength, we attribute the success to ourselves. It's us who have achieved this. Koyichi va'otzem yadi. But that's not the truth. The truth is, whatever a person can achieve after 30 years, what the Rebbe describes as a shinui shaloi be'erech, it's a profound change. It's something which is above and beyond, much more than the change of every single year. We might feel that this is koichi, but that's not true, because we're not of the ability to be able to achieve this through our own koyach. Rather, this is something that we achieve through that which has been imbued within us from our Rebbe. Although the Rebbe didn't cite it in the Sichos, but perhaps this is connected to the conclusion of the Hayom Yom of Chavtes Adar Rishon, where the Hayom Yom discusses how a certain Chassid gave a certain independent pirush on something which the Alter Rebbe had said. I was going to say it doesn't matter here, but of course it does, because it's a Farbrengen, about the phrase L'chaim v'livracha. And he gave a pshat in it. And how does the Hayom Yom conclude? That the Tzemach Tzedek said, Das ken sagen nor a Chassid, was getan in Avodah und gedavent 30 Jahr. Although on the one hand it was an independent comment, it was a thought that came to his mind, but this could only be stated by someone who worked for 30 years. In similar fashion, we know that there was once a journalist who came to Dollars. It was in advance of a certain Yom Pagra, I don't know which one, but he thought he was going to get the scoop. And he asked the Rebbe, do you have a message where we're going to videotape the message, a message which is connected with this Yom Pagra? And the Rebbe told him that you will go and get a recording of what was spoken about last year at the Yom Pagra. One might wonder, that's old. But the Rebbe continued to explain, because the things that are said on the day, and they're said at a Hisvadis, they're said at a Farbrengen, and they're said at a Yom Skula, and they're said with a gathering of Chassidim, have a Hislavus Yisera, they have additional passion, and therefore they're on a much higher level than something quote-unquote new. And we also understand that that's our koyach as well. Our koyach as well, we look at Shleishim Shana, some people might be thinking and wondering, well, what's going to be new? The answer is, of course it's going to be new. We have to look at everything which the Rebbeim have given us, the Rebbeim have invested in us, and hafachba v'hafachba, to overturn it again and again to find something which is new. And the mandate of this year is much higher than usual. Every year we're expected to achieve a shinui, but this year we're expected to achieve a shinui which is shaloi be'erech, which is completely shaloi be'erech. We are the Chassidish of Farbrengen, and there is a vart, there is a teaching of the Frierdiker Rebbe that one can connect with a Rebbe on various levels. Of course, there's the idea of learning the Rebbe's Torah, there's Yichidus, etc. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said that one of the highest ways that a Chassid can connect with the Rebbe is to sing a niggin which was given by that Rebbe, where we connect on the highest level, on a level which is higher than Erpnimi and Makif, on a much higher level. So I'd like therefore to begin the Farbrengen with a niggin, one of the nigunim of the Rebbe, and we're going to be led by by Nissi Lankram, a alumnus of Yeshiva Dola and currently back in Yeshiva Dola. And I also want to give him a big yasher koyach for his music throughout the evening. Here, I should wait. One of the You're running the sound? One of the usual or common frequent brachas that the Rebbe would give prior to a Farbrengen is that it should be his vadius pe'ilias, that it should be a Farbrengen that doesn't just inspire the attendees in thought with fresh ideas or inspiring ideas, but rather it should lead to action. So the organizers of this event have put a lot of thought into that. And we've decided already towards the beginning of the program, we're going to focus on Hamaisa Hu Ha'ikar. The deed is the main thing. And I'd like to call upon Rabbi Menachem Lipsker, who is the dedicated director of Tzivos Hashem here in Melbourne, to introduce this mitzvah, to introduce this pu'ula to the entire community.
Chaim l'chaim. There's an old saying in Gan Yisrael, right before Lichtsinden, as these somehow counselors have to manage to get their whole bunk ready for camp, showered, clean their room, and all the other camp responsibilities. So you can imagine right before Lichtsinden, everyone's in the shower. The few showers that are never left for the staff are packed. And then someone runs by and goes, it's skia, 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 skia. And a second later they go, okay, don't worry, skia's over. I remember the words of my mentor, one of my mentors, happens to be my older brother, former YG Shliach Velvel. I was actually on the way to camp that night. He was calling from Melbourne, Australia. And he took a moment, and I was about to board the bus, Motzei Gimmel Tammuz. It was a special moment. He really guided me, and I think in very important times. This is the age that I grew up, 11 years old, Gimmel Tammuz, and I got the full wind of it. He was the one tasked with taking me 5 a.m. to the Rebbe's room as my father woke us up. We'd come back from the hospital, Motzei Shabbos, and my father woke us up and actually didn't tell me anything. It was my brother's task to take me by the Rebbe's room. I could tell you it was the closest he ever felt if what the Churban Beis HaMikdash felt like, even for an 11-year-old, when we just knew every moment and any moment the Rebbe is going to take us out of Golos, and all of a sudden our whole world froze. But somehow we were able to continue. Somehow, thanks to the Bachrim, only a few weeks later we were thrown into camp, and the Bachrim were forced, and the girls were forced to all of a sudden face these children, which happened to, I believe, had more amunah than the adults. Whether it was the Shluchim, with Rabbi Kunin's announcement at the oil, moments as the Aron HaKodesh made it to the oil, people didn't know if they were going to continue their shluchos. It sounded like the plan that Rebbe gave came to an abrupt, frightening end. And when Rebbe Shlomo calls out and said, Rebbe, we're going to continue. Or whether it was just a regular day chassid that said, we're going to continue. I remember the Satmar kids laughing at me in the bungalow colony. We hardly had a minyan on Shabbos. A lot of men went back to the city for Shabbos. And a lot of Satmar kids laughing at me and saying, what's it going to be? Like, the Rebbe's going to hide for 40 years and then come back? And I took it, and I'm thinking, what are you, crazy? 40 days would be too much. Even as 11 years old, I understood this. But here we are, and somehow we continued. It's not somehow, because hu b'chaim, azar b'chaim, af hu b'chaim. So my brother calls me up, Gimmel Tammuz by night, and he said, Menachem, after a short, quick Farbrengen, I was about to board the bus, and Velvel says, I just want to remind you something. Dalet Tammuz is not after Gimmel Tammuz. It's Gimmel Tammuz and one day. The day's not over. We all have that little sigh of relief as many of us relive the whole day, and there's a lot to do. The Rebbe gave us a lot of instructions for that day, and there's a bit of a secret relief. Motzei Gimmel Tammuz, sort of, we did it, okay, let's move on. And his words still echo to me, Dalet Tammuz isn't after Gimmel Tammuz, it's Gimmel Tammuz on another day. When it was time to decide for this Farbrengen what the Hachlata will be, a little bit of a different spin. It's usually a massive achana for Gimmel Tammuz. This year was beautiful to see. All of Anash gathered together, learning my Marim. But the decision this year would be that it won't be much before Gimmel Tammuz. Actually, better, let's do it after Gimmel Tammuz. Shleishim Shana. It's a year of Shleishim, as the Rebbe was machadish by Hakel, that it's not just a day of Hakel, one day, but the whole year became a Shnas Hakel. It's something that as Hasidim we have to remember, that it's not just, okay, we did it, we went through it, we went through our checklist, or we went through the motions, or the Farbrengen, but now it begins. It's probably not for nothing that the Rebbe always Farbrenged would make maybe more sense to Farbreng the night before. Every time there was a Yom Depaga, the Rebbe always Farbreng the night after. And you would think it's proper to Farbreng the night before, so it can prepare us for this day. But the Rebbe's point was, no, Shki is not over. Now it begins. So this year, something very special was decided. And as a proper achana, there's going to be, as you see on the table, 10 weeks of preparation and preparing for a new year, achana for Rosh Hashanah, and 10 different amazing, whether learning, whether Farbrengens. This is going to be every Thursday night, and the shiurim will be for men and women, and the Farbrengens will be for men, but also will be live. It will be streamed live. It is obviously so appropriate that it's dafke through Torah. That is the way Yidden unite. That's the way the Rebbe showed us. It's dafke through Torah, and that's why the Rebbe came out with the whole Rambam campaign. And it's dafke with the achdus of Hasidim that will bring us to the end. The Rebbe repeated the story that when the Tzemach Tzedek at one point became very ill, and his Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka asked the Rebbe what's going to be. And the Tzemach Tzedek said two answers. He said, number one's from the kinder. The Tzemach Tzedek had great children, obviously starting from the Rebbe Maharash, and each child in his own right became actually a Rebbe. And he said, from the kinder, that's what's going to be. And the Rebbe said, Zweitens, we have the Achdus of Chassidim, and that's what's going to get us to the finish line. The Rebbe repeated the story. And the Rebbe said that the first reply is not necessary, is not really applicable, as the Rebbe did not have physical children. So the Rebbe said the only thing that we do have is the Achdus of Chassidim. And perhaps the Rebbe is telling us something else, something deeper, that through the second thing, when Chassidim unite, that's how we become the children of the Rebbe. And with that, we'll make it to the finish line. So it's so important. The Rebbe literally gave everything. The Rebbe promised us the first night of being Rebbe. He will give everything. He will not take a single moment's rest. He's the only Rebbe, including in Chabad Rabbeim, that never took a single day in dacha, in holidays. We all know that Rebbe was once at the Rebbetzin on the grass. In Yiddish, you say holidays, like the countryside, it's called dacha. And the Rebbe was with the Rebbetzin on the lawn. They had a tea for 15 minutes. And the Rebbe looks there and says, Nu, yoytze dacha. We did dacha. That was the Rebbe's dacha. Not for a second did the Rebbe sleep, but that's not all. One of the first sichas the Rebbe told us after Yud Shvat was about many tzaddikim that swore that they would not go into Gan Eden until Mashiach comes. The Rebbe bring a few examples. But then the Rebbe said, the Frierdiker Rebbe is different because the Frierdiker Rebbe knows when you talk about attaining Mesiras Nefesh, if it's a level you're trying to attain, then you could be bribed in heaven. But if you're a Rebbe, it's not about attaining any type of lofty levels. And the Rebbe said, surely the Frierdiker Rebbe will not will not rest, and even not enter Gan Eden until it all happens. The Rebbe addressed this again a number of years later in 1989. The date is Tammuz. It's Parshas Koirach. And towards the end of the Sikha, the Rebbe makes reference to his Sikha he said many years earlier. And the Rebbe smiled. And the Rebbe said, it seems like in heaven they know what they're doing. And somehow they got the tzaddik to push it off. And then the Rebbe got serious, and the Rebbe said, it seems like the only eitzah is to make a neder al das rabbim, a neder on the mind and the conscience of everyone else. And the Rambam Paskins, the Rebbe said, that a neder al das rabbim is unbreakable even if someone convinces you out of it. As I'm told, the Rebbe got quiet at that point and said something to himself. We have to remember as Hasidim, since Gimmel Tammuz Tafshin and Daled, the Rebbe has not rested. Not only from Yud Shvat, that the Rebbe gave in everything of himself, as the Rebbe quotes in Basi Lagani, Mash L'chayev Mineged, perhaps even harder, after Gimmel Tammuz, the Rebbe has not taken a moment break to beseech on our behalf, to look after us, to give us the strength, and give us all that it takes. It's our turn to not sleep anymore. We have to remember that every moment, we can't just do the checklist of Gimmel Tammuz and move on. We have to remember Shloshim Shana. And as Rabbi Lesha said earlier, that Be'ezus Hashem, as the Pasuk says, Vayihi b'Shloshim Shana, and Niftuchu Hashemayim ve'edem maris elikim, the year that we will see Gilei Elikus. So it is so appropriate, and I beseech on everyone to tut al tzvas erkent and prepare yourself. It should be what the Rebbe said in his final mimer he gave to us. It can't just be something that the Rebbe pushes at you. It has to be v'yichu elecha. We got to bring the oil, the koyach that Moshe gives us. We need to bring now that oil. We have to internalize it, make it for real. I find it no better way to unite through Torah and Farbrengens. Farbrengens, of course, is the core of every Jewish home, every Hasidic home. And Ayomim actually gives a whole description of how to make Farbrengens, where and when. So I hope everyone is able to join. The way to do that, you have papers. So please sign up. There's a QR code. And please sign up. There will be a raffle for a ticket to be by the Rebbe for Shana. And if you come 7 out of 10, it's obviously going to be on the honesty base. So please register and join. I think there's something incredible that through the ups and downs, the hard times and not, our community has been through a lot. There's something to say about our community that keeps rolling, and I always found that the bracha, perhaps the bracha rests. I know a lot of communities went through what we were going through and almost fell apart, and somehow we keep it together, and I really find because there was never really a strong politics, never really strong fights. There's something beautiful about the achdus of this community. However, achdus is not the lack of fighting. It's really uniting. And with that, we're going to tell the Rebbe back, we shall not either rest or slumber until your dream is realized. And forget about a ticket to the Rebbe for Tishrei. We'll all have that ticket on eagle's wings to the Yerushalayim HaKodesh, the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi, in Eretz Yisrael HaShlema that belongs to every single Jew, with every single last Jew, Va'atem Teluktu Echad Echad, as the Rebbe ends off in his Maimer, V'niske Zenzich mit the Rebbe Dalamata V'hui Galenu.
I initially thought that tonight I would introduce a brand new film screening, a Pirsum Rishon. However, instead I do have the privilege of introducing a video that many of you may have seen this past Motzei Shabbos, because it was released already a couple of days ago. But I actually think that maybe there's a very interesting hashgacha pratis, very apt, because we've been speaking about the pasuk Vayihi b'shleishim shana, and it was in the 30th year. The pasuk ends Niftachu hashamayim ve'erev maris elikim. But what does it say in the middle of the pasuk? It says Vani b'seich hagola. I, Yecheskel, was in the exile on the Har Kavar, on the river Kvar. And the Rebbe, in a number of times, gave a very interesting translation of that pasuk. In Chassidus, Nahar can represent a flow of ideas, just like a river doesn't stop, our thought process doesn't stop. It sometimes happens that you go to someone and you tell him a Nahar, you give him an idea. And how does he respond? Kvar, which is the Aramaic for I heard it already. And the Rebbe says when someone hears an idea and he says, I heard that already, Vani b'seich hagola, then that's a sign that he's in exile, because an idea should never become stale. It should never become irrelevant. There should always be a way, as we spoke earlier, of reapplying this again and again. This film that we're going to show tonight is titled The Ultimate Influencer Is You. And the focus of the video is to encourage each of us to be an influencer. And I think before we show the video, it would be a very opportune time to reflect on the efforts of the pioneering families of our own community here in Melbourne, who are essentially the foundation of our entire community. These were people who rolled up their sleeves and they forged a difficult path forward. They didn't always have an easy time, but they wanted to bring the Rebbe's influence to everyone. In particular, I wanted to highlight today is, of course, the yahrzeit on Gimmel Tammuz of Reb Zalman Sabransky Olav HaSholem, and tonight and tomorrow is the yahrzeit of Reb Yitzchak David Groner Olav HaSholem. And as I've mentioned in the past years, I think there's no better words, as everyone here is familiar with the Hayom Yom of tonight and tomorrow, and I'll just read a section of it. The one single Chassid student who devotes his heart, his mind, and his soul to Torah and to bolstering Torah, he effects wonders in a large city, in all that city's affairs, in a manner that transcends the natural order. So this is something that we saw of the leaders of the past generation, and this is something which is incumbent upon us to do as well. If I could invite everyone to give your attention to the video screens.
Von jener Hilule, von der Siderene, von dem Rebbe beschwert, was Moser Nafshe al-Hafotzes Hatero, und als sie soll der Griechen bis zu Apina Nidachas bemokim, bis zu Apina Nidachas benefesh, bis zu Akoten Uktano bejahadus, bis zu Akoten Uktano beshoni. Steht aus Demel Bishas Tirose begolui, dole mato, upeil Yeshuis bekerev, ho'oret.
I grew up in a conservative community. I went off to go to graduate school at the University of Maryland. There were no shluchim down there at that time. So Rebbe Springer would come down periodically to visit the college, and he basically did the job of a shliach. I became close with him, and then the following year, I met Devorah.
He did take me to the Springer's house, and it was really, really special. When we got engaged, he said, well, you probably want to get a bracha from the Rebbe. Okay, how do we do this? And he did everything, and we just showed up.
Armed with Soviet tanks and guns, the North Korean army attacked its southern neighbors. Troops and military equipment poured down from the north.
They sent me a letter to report. I lived on 272 Kingston Avenue, which is right around the corner from the Lubavitcher. And I befriended Rabbi Eliyahu Gross. He took me to Farbrengen, and I liked it. Before I was going overseas, I already had my uniform on. And Eliyahu Rose said to me, Bernie, I'm gonna have you meet the Rebbe, and the Rebbe will give you a blessing.
NBC Television.
Having been a secular NBC television producer, totally removed from anything Jewish, I decided to take a leave of absence from NBC to seek the truth, the meaning of life. I ended up in Brazil, and there I met a Shliach of the Rebbe, the daughter of the Rabbi of Rio de Janeiro, Rabbi Blumenfeld. He started talking to me, and I suddenly saw it, and my whole life was changed because the Rebbe had sent a Shliach to the most decadent place in the world, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil.
Und azay zeche tafkide shol kol echad mi Yisrael, az soll lufton mit sich und mit der ganzen Welt, soll sein der Yakriv Korban la Hashem, nennt machen die Welt bechol in Yone Heule, jeder lefi ma'amode und matzove, leide Chelis und den Möglichkeiten, was mot gegeben.
Sometime during the winter, we finally had Yechidus. He asked us a lot of questions. We answered him as best we could. And then he was quiet for, it seemed like a very long time. And then he said, in Washington, there are no bubbies. And I thought, huh?
We looked at him, he said, we had no idea what he was talking about. And he said, it means there's no one there to teach Taras and Mishpacha. You will teach Taras and Mishpacha.
They could have scraped me off the floor. I had been married for a few months. I had been frum for maybe a year and a half. I wanted to turn around, see whether there was somebody else he was talking to.
I had learned to do, I had not learned to teach. And so to refocus and say we have to teach was something of a shock to us.
Das ist der gewähnte Stadlos von den Baal Ahilule, aber durchnehmen bis Zakotten und Ktano bedas oder a viele Beschonin. Als sie sollen wissen von Shlichusa und Baela, als a viele, als sie gefunden sich in Amai mit Dumatza, was sie seinen Liatim an gegen Rabbi, bis noch weniger sind mehr nicht wie a Jochid. Soll wissen sein, als ist ein Elam Molle, und ist ein Rabbi, und sein Tafkid ist machen von dem Rabbi Matzibu, wo sie darf sein, nächstes verbunden mit Schleimus in Welt.
I was encouraged by the Rebbe to be a speaker from the first moment that I met him. I have been able to go around the world for 40 years telling one story, the story of my life, how I changed from being a totally secular NBC producer to becoming a Hasidic wife and mother.
You lecture.
Thank you very
much more experience. That's what happened.
Thank you very
much. And there was never a time that I passed by that he went, when did you speak last? When are you speaking again? Rabbi Groner, is Mrs. Resnick speaker? Can you arrange a speaking engagement for her? It was endless.
I'm going to California to give a speech in Carlsbad. It's near San Diego.
But not a speech, a single man.
No.
When I came over to Korea, we were in so many battles, real battles, and the bullets were just flying. It was very frightful, very frightful. He wanted to have contact with me, the Rebbe. So I wrote to him, and the Rebbe answered me. My dear Bernard, I was pleased to receive your letter. I was glad that you described the Seder in Korea. They brought troops, Jewish boys from other units, and we had the Seder in the tent. It was a little surprising, the Rebbe writes, that you do not mention anything about your personal contact with your friends and matters of Yiddishkeit. For while influenced by good example is effective often enough, it is necessary to make it a subject of conversation whenever possible. I'm looking forward to your next letter.
Milachatchile ist gegeben geworden und beschaffen geworden die Welt in Asami Neifen, gedei Ayid beseif kol Haderis, wenn gefindt sich in Apino Nidachas bisman oder bemokim, soll sich nicht schrecken vor der Welt und wissen, als der Emisser Balabos von Kol Oelom Kule, gedei der Nefesh Achas mi Yisrael bechol Mokim, und bechol Zman soll me male sein Shlichusei Boelo.
What about the lectures?
In June, I'm going to Lyon and Tunis.
In June? Until June?
No,
have
we
you
invited
no
me.
job to that?
You'll make work.
You make it? Okay.
Thank you much. Bless. Have
Thank
good
you.
news.
It's been a remarkable story that has changed the lives of so many people. People have stopped working on Shabbos. People have gone to the mikveh. People have taken on remarkable acts of kindness just because of having heard the story.
How your lectures?
Baruch Hashem, it was wonderful in Tzfat. It was especially successful. And I come.
Das geht durch Schleichim Shona. In der Emes Alieni wird tegen demel ta Shinui. Shelei be'erech ha-Shinui niflo legabe da'alis in der Yorzeiten midi Shona v'Shona. Ich davon echt verstandig, als in die alle Joni, was dort sie seine gewähren am Molle, asher Omal b'meshech Yemei Chayov, darf zukommen Bazari, und bei Talmide, wie Talmide, und die, was wollen werden, Mikanu Lehaba, Zari, wie Talmide.
You're certainly not to try to make a blemish on my fame as a teacher. And that means that you will show example I am successful in teaching because my pupils or my followers are doing even more than the teachers have asked me.
He changed my view of Yiddishkeit, that we had to go beyond ourselves to show other Yidden the joy of Yiddishkeit, the beauty of Yiddishkeit, and that was what we should focus on.
We made a lot of warm impressions on people who we kept up with for decades. It was something very special that I never would have volunteered for. But the Rebbe said, "You can do this." Okay?
Das bringt a Rob, als wir Kitzu verano no Sheichne Jofer behu besechon der Baal Hayilule, zusammen mit Zare, wo sie seinen Bachayim. Allah es kam, aber kam und die, wo sie seinen Machaye Chayim, seinen Mashpia und Nefis Yadus bis wie Wasser und Bechol Mokim, Shiyodo Magaz. Gehen zusammen zu der Kras Hagiulo Amitis Vashlemo und dem Hero Beyomeino Mamos.
To influence all the Jewish people to do a big task. But nevertheless, every Jew has the power to do so because he is going with the help of the blessing of God Almighty himself.
This production is made possible through the generosity of the members of the GEM Foundation. With material
Johannesburg's largest Shul, the iconic Sydenham Highlands North Hebrew congregation, and which he accepted with the encouragement of the Rebbe. Rabbi Goldman is widely credited with transforming the Shul, in the words of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, into one of the great synagogues of the English-speaking world. Following 35 years of outstanding leadership, he was appointed Rabbi Emeritus for life. He's also president of the South African Rabbinical Association and often represents the Jewish Yiddishkeit on South African radio and television. With us tonight is also his wife and partner in all of the above, Rebbetzin Rachel Goldman. A popular teacher in Rebbetzin, she's also founder and chairperson of Women of the World, a highly successful organization which nurtures Jewish women, promotes education, and a more positive South Africa. I might mention that Rebbetzin Goldman will also be speaking for Neshei B'nai Chabad in exactly 1 week from tonight, on Tuesday night, Yud Tammuz, at the home of Mrs. Cohen, 23 Balaclava Road, and everyone's encouraged to attend. Rabbi and Rebbetzin Goldman are, of course, also the parents and parents-in-law of our very own, we're calling them now our very own, Izzy and Batsheva Goldman. By extension, then, we owe them a debt of gratitude for all the wonderful work that their children are doing in our community. This is by no means the first time Rabbi Goldman has visited our shores. I remember during a previous visit, Rabbi Goldman was the main presenter at a conference of the local rabbinate, and he is indeed a rabbi's rabbi, consulted regularly by pulpit rabbis throughout South Africa and internationally. It was during that time that I discovered he had a solution to every rabbinic problem, besides speaking during davening. If he didn't have the answer, I drew the conclusion that perhaps that's not a job for the rabbinate to tackle, but rather for the lay people. It is our great privilege to invite Rabbi Goldman to the podium, and he will share with us his keen insights into the Rebbe's unique philosophy of outreach with Ahavas Yisrael.
L'chaim. Thank you so much, Rabbi Leshes, for your warm introduction, for leading this evening's special Farbrengen, and for the invitation. Rabbonim, Shluchim, community leaders, ladies and gentlemen, friends. You're very brave to ask a pulpit rabbi to speak to you and to give a keynote address, because pulpit rabbis sometimes have reputations, you know. A guy walked out of shul in the middle of my sermon. He didn't sneak out the back door. He walked a grand exit down the center aisle, you know. After davening, his wife comes up to me to apologize for her husband. She says, "Rabbi, please don't be offended. He always walks in his sleep." The late Chief Rabbi Harris of South Africa once told us that a guy walked out in the middle of his drosha and he stopped him. He said, "Where are you going?" He said, "I'm going to have a haircut." He says, "Now, a haircut? Why didn't you have one before?" He says, "I didn't need one before." So some people make jokes about Chabad also. There are cynics out there, although less and less and less, and after 30 years, I think the cynics are receding into the distant past, Baruch Hashem. But for years, there were people making snide remarks. We heard earlier, Rabbi Lipsker, what's going to be after Gimmel Tammuz. So they say, how many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? Only one, but the light bulb has to want to change. And how many Jewish mothers does it take to change a light bulb? Well, I'll just sit in the dark, it's okay. And how many Lubavitchers does it take to change a light bulb? Now the light is still on. And that's no joke. That is 100% true. The light, as we know, as we see, as we experience right now here, in this hall of this beautiful Kehillah, an Irva Ein B'Yisrael, Melbourne Chabad community, the light continues to burn brightly, illuminating the whole city, the whole country. Now, when you live far away, it's not always easy to get to the Kinnis HaShluchim every single year, especially your Rov, you have responsibilities. Your most important balabus decides to make a chasana of his kid on Gimmel Tammuz, on the Kinnis HaShluchim date. So it was a few years that I hadn't been, talking quite some years ago. And then it came, and my beloved, lamented Shwager of Moshe Kedlarsky of Sholem did his famous roll call. Shluchim of the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. And then the Shluchim who went out after Gimmel Tammuz. And he saw hundreds of younger light, hundreds of young men standing up that they had dedicated their lives to volunteer to join the Rebbe's army after Gimmel Tammuz. It was the first time I saw it with my own eyes in the flesh, and I mamish cried. Before Gimmel Tammuz, there were less than 1,000 shluchim. Today, there's well over 5,000. Which means that thousands of young men and women born after the Rebbe's physical passing, who never saw the Rebbe in person, have gone out on his mission to bring Yiddishkeit and Chassidus to the whole world. Is it an exaggeration to say, Oy Avinu Chai? I've seen the pamphlet on the tables, the whole thing of Yankov Avinu Loy Meis. The Gemara asked, what really, did they bury him in Hebron alive? And the famous Gemara, Mazare B'chaim, Avhu B'chaim, what is the definition of immortality? You know, rabbis speak at Levias and consecrations, unveilings. And I often say, the ultimate inscription is not the one etched in stone here on this tombstone. The ultimate inscription is the one that is etched permanently in our consciousness, and even more so in the way we choose to live our lives. And so 30 years later, the Rebbe's influence keeps growing exponentially. That people who never saw the Rebbe have dedicated their lives to his calling is unbelievable. So you know there's hardly a place in the world left without a shliach. It's very hard today to find a place to go on shlichus where there isn't anybody there already. Excuse me. In my neck of the woods in Africa, you might be surprised to know that there are today shluchim in the Congo, Rwanda, Nigeria, Uganda, Kenya, Zambia, Ghana, and more. I have a young man in my shul in Johannesburg who comes from Scarsdale, and he went to Ghana on some kind of 2-year business thing, not the Peace Corps. And he met the Shliach, Rabbi Majeski in Ghana. Today he's a frum young man. A boy from New York had to go to Ghana to meet a Shliach to change his life. We can't even imagine what the Jewish world would look like today without the Rebbe and the army that he created. You know, every Yom Kippur before we go to Shul, Kol Nidre, we bless our children. Who did the Rebbe bless before Kol Nidre? The Talmidim, the yeshiva students were his children. I will never forget one Erev Yom Kippur before they moved to the Shul. The Rebbe still stood at his door and just outside Gan Eden HaTachten and gave his bracha, and it was a crush. If you think the Wallabies or the Springboks have a scrum, it was nothing compared to the crush by the Rebbe's bracha on Erev Yom Kippur. One year I was there, just around the corner, straining to hear the Rebbe's words, and the guy next to me's elbow was in my neck. And there was nowhere to move and nowhere to push him and nowhere to escape. I thought, this is the end. I'm dying right here and now. Mind you, it's not a bad place to die. Erev Yom Kippur in 70 by the Rebbe's bracha, there are worse places to die, I suppose. But Baruch Hashem, I survived. How many children did the Rebbe have? People say he didn't have any children. But they're wrong. He had millions of children. Exactly 30 years ago, Chief Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau, Zol Gesund Sein, said, the Rebbe had no children, but he left the whole world orphaned. We are all the Rebbe's children. And please God, we will all dedicate our lives to his life's mission to strengthen Jewish life around the world and prepare the world for his greatest dream, his greatest wish. Mashiach now, Amen, L'chaim. So Rabbi Lesh mentioned that I'm grateful for what he said about Gimmel Tammuz and Shloshim Shana. I want to focus on outreach and on the Rebbe's unique approach to Avos Yisrael, which he took to new levels. Over the years, even those who were not necessarily admirers of Chabad across the Jewish spectrum have come under the Rebbe's wings, under the Rebbe's influence, and joined his movement to reach out to as many Yidden as possible. But the Rebbe was, of course, the Avrom Avinu of Kiruv, of outreach, of Avos Yisrael, and Afotzas Hayadis V'Mayonas, and reaching out, a trailblazer like none other. No one else in history had ever undertaken such a monumental global campaign to reach every single Yid in the whole wide world. The Rebbe was the most ambitious visionary in history. And today his army spans the globe, capturing the imagination of writers, thinkers, philosophers, poets, religious and secular leaders, and lay people alike. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs Shalom famously stated once, as the Nazis Yamach Shemam hunted down every last Jew in hate, the Rebbe taught us to search and seek out every last Jew in love. So the Hasidic approach to Avos Yisrael goes back to the Baal Shem Tov. We're talking 300 years. But the Rebbe took it to new levels. So today, maybe everyone does Kiruv. It's popular. Even those who laughed at it once upon a time. But it wasn't always that way. I'll tell you two quick stories. In the early years, in the 60s, I remember my sister, Crane Klein, went on a Beis Yaakov convention with Beis Rivka. Beis Rivka joined the Beis Yaakov convention over Shabbos. I think it was in Baltimore. And every school had to put on a skit, a little act. So of course the Lubavitcher girls from Beis Rivka put on a skit about Uforatzta, reaching out. The principal of the Baltimore Beis Yaakov found it necessary to get up for the whole crowd of girls and make a disclaimer. This is not our derech. You heard that line? Non-frum Jews will contaminate you, unquote. That was the approach of many in the frum world in the 60s. A famous rabbi in New York, whose name I will not mention now, wrote, and I saw it in writing black and white, arguing with Torah sources, Kavayochel, that the mitzvah of Avas Yisrael does not apply to non-frum Jews, unquote. And he went so far as to show that the argument of Tinuk Shenishbe does not wash either. A well-known Rav, whose name you're familiar with. Today, Baruch Hashem, everyone is on the Kiruv bandwagon, which is what the Rebbe wanted. The Rebbe was not looking for a monopoly. He didn't want exclusivity. He wanted everyone to do the same. He wanted to change the world, and he did. But as we know, others call it Kiruv Rechoikim, drawing in those who are distant, who are far. And the Rebbe, countless times, there are videos and videos where he told Choshev Rabbonim, who used that term, Kiruv Rechoikim, that he rejected that term, Kiruv Rechoikim. It has to be Kiruv Kroivim. Every Yid is a Korev. The famous story with George Rohr, the great philanthropist. How he came to the Rebbe once and told him that in his shul in Manhattan, Kehilat Yeshurim, he was very proud to report to the Rebbe that they had just started a new minyan for beginners for Jews who have no background, or Jews with no Jewish background. The Rebbe said, So George Rohr repeated it. And again the Rebbe said, This went on 3 or 4 times. George didn't know what to say anymore. He said it 4 times. What did he do? I mean, the Rebbe suffered from sciatica. He wasn't hard of hearing. Eventually the Rebbe said to him, there's no such thing as a Jew without a Jewish background. Every Yid has a background. Every Yid is a Ben Avram, Yisrael, Yaakov, or a Basar, Rivka, Rochel, V'Leah. Today, since last Simchas Torah, October 7th, we see the background and the neshama of Yidden who were seemingly so far removed being revealed. My wife and I were at did a tour, a speaking tour of the west coast of America and Canada last November after the Kinus. We did a Shabbaton in Spokane, Washington, not exactly a great, thriving Jewish metropolis. And the Shliach, Rabbi Yisrael Hahn, I think he thought he knows every Jew in Spokane, Washington by now. He had a Friday night dinner, and a Jew arrived, unannounced, who he'd never met. And he sat opposite me. He said, Shalom Aleichem, David. What brought you here tonight, David? I asked him. He said, October 7th. Jews are coming out of the woodwork, suddenly realize who they are. And we've heard reports of Jewish women who had married out of the faith and are now reflecting and wondering whether they made a mistake because a non-Jewish husband doesn't get it after October 7th. Not on the same page as her. Maybe it's the same for him as Ukraine or who knows where. And thinking whether they made a mistake. The Rebbe had a very special, unique relationship with Eretz Yisrael. We go back to the beginning of Mivtza Tefillin. Remember Lag B'Omer parade just before the 6-Day War. Nasser, Yamach Shemom of Egypt, had galvanized the whole Arab world to drive the Jews into the sea. And Israel was not yet established as a military power. And Jews around the world were petrified that Chas v'Shalom would be another Churban, another Holocaust, God forbid. And there was one lone voice in the wilderness, the Rebbe, who told Israel and Jews the world over not to be afraid. There will be a great salvation, he said. One lone voice. And he launched the Tefillin campaign, not just as a mitzvah campaign, but specifically, the nation of the world will see the name of God upon you. This is the Tefillin Shabbat with the shin of Hashem's name. That's what they'll see. We're going to see an Uncle Moshe cap with Hashem's name on it. We're going to see the Tefillin. And it'll strike fear and dread in their hearts, as it did. We saw the film clips of the Egyptian army leaving their tanks and their boots behind and running for their lives. Before the 6-Day War, there's film clips of Rabbi Shlomo Goren going with the Parks Department to designate which parks YOSSY should become cemeteries. That's what they were expecting. And you see film clips of Rebbe Hashem putting on film by bus stations on secular Israelis. Fast forward 24 years. The first Gulf War. You remember Saddam Hussein? You remember him? Now we have already new anti-Semites, but then Saddam Hussein was prominent. And Saddam Hussein, Iraq invaded Kuwait, and George Bush Sr. said, if you're not out by the 15th of January, we're going in. And what does Saddam Hussein threaten? He's going to fire his Scud missiles on Israel. And they were worried about chemical warfare, and Israel gave out gas masks to every single Jewish man, woman, every single man, woman, and child in the whole Israel. The Rebbe said it's not necessary. You don't need gas masks. They gave it out anyway. So it's Erev, the 15th of January. I prepared a drosha for my Friday night sermon. There's 1,000 people in Shul. And I'm going to quote the Rebbe, who said that Israel is safe. Not only safe. The Rebbe's words were, Israel's the safest place. Remember, there's another video of Rabbi Yitzchak Reitbert, going to the Rebbe, that his son was getting married in a week or two in Israel. He said to the Rebbe, maybe we should move, there's going to be a Melchama, maybe we should bring the Chasana to New York instead. The Rebbe gives him $1, he says, Obgeben Tzedok in Eretz Yisrael. Give it to me. He thought maybe the Rebbe didn't hear him, he said it again. The Rebbe gave him another $1 to put the Tzedok in Eretz Yisrael. So I'm preparing this sermon, quoting the Rebbe, trying to inspire people who are petrified. We had an emergency meeting the night before in my shul with thousands of people and raising money for Israel and saying Tillim and God knows what's going to be. So I prepared this rousing drosha, quoting the Rebbe that it's going to be okay. And in the middle of Lachadoidi, a little door next to my seat opens a crack, and one of my balabatim pokes his head in and says, Rabbi, I just heard the 6 p.m. news. Just before Shabbos came in, Iraq fired 3 Scuds on Israel. He didn't know what happened, what damage they had done, God forbid. And now, as Chatoy ani maskir hayoim, I had Sfeikis. I'm going to give this rousing drosha that everything's okay, Israel's safe, and they'll go out and hit a 7 o'clock news, and God knows what they're going to hear. And I'm on the horns of a dilemma. What do? I confess. I had doubts. So I go ahead and give the drosha as planned, as prepared. Do I say, sorry, I have laryngitis, no sermon today? Do I go up to my office, to my files, and find an old drosha on the parsha? Baruch Hashem, I overcame my doubts, and I gave the drosha k'moshehu. And we later saw that the 3 scuds landed nowhere and no damage. And then the next 36 scuds, 39 in all that were fired from Iraq on Israel, caused not one fatality, not one injury. The South African Zionist Federation was organizing a solidarity mission to Israel at that time, during the Gulf War, to show support and solidarity for Israel and its people. And because the Rebbe was so strong, I suggested to my colleague, the head Shliach, Rabbi Mendel Lipsker, maybe we should ask the Rebbe, maybe we should join on this solidarity mission to Israel, based on what the Rebbe is saying. So he asked, and the Rebbe said, Noch ein Hadover. And a half a dozen of Shluchim joined this solidarity mission. I took my 12-year-old daughter at the time, Zizi, who's today a Shlucha in Cape Town, Zizi Darren, a Bas Mitzvah present. I took her to the Gulf War. My mother, Alaa Shalom, said, are you crazy? Taking a 12-year-old girl into a war zone? I said, Ma, the Rebbe said it's safe. Those 5 days in Israel of our solidarity mission, there was not one scud. Went up to Tzfas, I was sitting with Rebbe Elik Friedman. He says, Poshet Hachnos Zorchem, we should organize a scud for you or something, You should see the Patriot defense missiles in action. When the Rebbe launched Mifsat Tefillin, not everybody agreed. Famous Rabbonim wrote dissertations arguing that it's wrong. You can't just put on tefillin on anybody. Gufnoki, this, that, the other. My wife was in high school in the Hebrew Academy of Cleveland. One of her teachers was one of the Telzer Rebbitzins. 1967. The Rebbe launched Mifsat Tefillin. She came in and said, and I quote, how dare the Lubavitcher Rebbe say to put on tefillin on a Jew who eats treif? Baruch Hashem, those objections have long fallen by the wayside. The Rebbe taught us the intrinsic value of every mitzvah, the intrinsic value of every single yid, no matter where he was, no matter where he's going. It may light a fire, may begin a journey of Yiddishkeit, but even if it doesn't, that mitzvah is meaningful. And then came a new level, the mitzvah tank idea, taking the offensive, going out, not waiting for people to come to shul. Rabbis will tell you, if you wait for people to come to shul, you might wait and wait. So we got to go find them on the streets. And then there was another level. It was also controversial at first when the Rebbe allowed his Farbrengens to be recorded, to go on video, to go on the boxes in people's houses. There were many people who disagreed with that. The Rebbe, I think, it was an American football coach, not Aussie football, American football. His name was Vince Lombardi. He was the coach of the Green Bay Packers. They were the top team in those years. And they once asked him, they said, Lombardi, why don't you focus on defense? He said, the best defense is an offense. The Rebbe took that approach. And he went on the offensive. An Avas Yisrael outreach offensive. And he encouraged radio shows. Tanya on the radio. Parsha on the radio. For 24 years I ran the only Jewish radio program in South Africa, which was heard throughout Southern Africa. Today we have, Baruch Hashem, a Jewish radio station that operates 24/6. But in those days there was nothing, and I had every week, Sunday night, for an hour, I had a Jewish radio program with Torah, with interviews, with stories, dramatized Chassidish stories, music. And the Rebbe was very interested. Whenever I came to New York in those early years, Rabbi Charakov would ask me, how's the radio program going? And we knew that Rabbi Charakov was not the most original, creative person. Most of the things that he said came from the Rebbe. I had rabbis, older European rabbis in South Africa, when I started this radio program, when I was part of Chabad House. You know what they said? Es passt nicht. It's unbecoming for a rabbi to be on the radio. Inappropriate, not honorable, not bekovedik. It's like the guy, a Yiddish-speaking guy, he told his friend, he said, wenn ich wollte gekannt reden Englisch ein bisschen. If I could only speak English, I would go to Washington. Ich wollte gesagt, President Biden, I would tell him what I think. He said, yeah, if you could take English, so what would you tell Biden already? What would I tell him? I would go there and I said, President Biden, feh. See, you've got to be bilingual for that, you know. These people said feh, that are rabbis on the radio. But the Rebbe encouraged it very much. Last year, I had such a gratifying experience. You know, for 20 years it was pre-recorded. The last couple of years was live. And you're sitting there in the studio recording, and you wonder, is anybody listening? If it's a live show, you get calls, whatever, but yeah, is anybody listening, you know? And you have doubts. Last year, I'm in my Shul Shabbos morning. A guy walks in, I've never seen him before. He has a pretty full beard, a kippah sruga, with a kid who looks from along with him. New guy comes, I say, Shalom Aleichem, welcome. He says, are you Rabbi Goldman? I said, yeah. He says, I have to thank you. I said, you have to thank me? Have we ever met? He said, no. I said, so what do you have to thank me for? He says, I'll tell you. I was a kid growing up in the suburb called Midrand. There are some South Africans here tonight, my dear friends. They will tell you that they never heard of a Jew who lived in Midrand. I certainly didn't. This young man tells me he grew up in Midrand. His parents were extremely secular. If they ever went to a temple on a rare occasion, it would be Reform. And as he was getting older, he started finding an interest in Yiddishkeit. And he found a Tanakh. And he went up to his mother, he says, tell me about this book. This is our Bible, tell me about it. She poo-pooed it, she dismissed it. She said, it's just a bunch of stories, don't worry about it. So he tells me one Sunday night, he's fiddling with the dial on the radio, and he hears Jewish stuff. He came across, by accident, B'Hashgocha, my radio program. It's called The Jewish Sound. And he became a devoted listener every single Sunday night. And he got a basic Jewish education from the radio program. Until he found a rabbi who took him under his wing. And today he's frum and raising a frum family, his kids in Torah day schools. For a guy who was wondering, is anybody listening? I said, Ari, you made my day. He said, Rabbi, you made my life. The Rebbe saw that. Rabbi Yankee Tauber tells the story when he was a bocher in yeshiva in England, in London. There was a Satmara young man who did the unthinkable in those days. In those days, Satmar and Chabad were not in such a... Today, Baruch Hashem, we're good friends. But in those days, it wasn't. And a Satmar young man became a Lubavitcher. Unthinkable in Williamsburg, such a thing. And he came to learn in Lubavitch Yeshiva in London. He was with Yankee Tauber. And this Satmar Bocher's brother came from Williamsburg to London to try and save his lost brother from Lubavitch. And so he's talking to his brother, and he says, how can you be here with these people? They mix with the Zionists. They're heretics. They engage with non-from Jews, Poshim, Apakursim. So the ex-Satmar, now Lubavitch Bocher, says to his Satmar, the brother, so if that's the case, how can you come and talk to me? I should also be treif in your eyes. So the Satmar brother says, Nee, this forta bride. You're still my brother. To which his brother responded, I know a Jew who looks at every Yid like his brother, the Rebbe. Rabbi Leshus mentioned in his introduction that my first 10 years in South Africa, I came to open the first Chabad house. And 10 years later, the biggest shul in town approached me. I didn't apply for the job, and invited me to become the Rav. Because it wasn't just Tammuz Shul, it was the very prominent shul with 1,100 families. As I said, 1,000 people in shul every Friday night. I felt I had to ask the Rebbe. I couldn't just reject it. And based on the Rebbe's answers, I got very clear answers that my Shlichus should change course from Chabadas to the Rabbonis. His first answer was, Katzas askone v'rabbone anash al-asar. We should discuss it with the leaders and the Rabbonim of the Lubavitch community in Johannesburg first. And there were 5 leaders in the Rabbonim, and it was unanimous. Rabbi Shalom Begroner was one of them. And it was unanimous that it's a Kibush Lubavitch. I must go for it. So I began negotiations, and when the negotiations were successful, I wrote back to the Rebbe, and I asked clearly that there's a Rebbe saying that my Shlichus is now changing to this. And I got a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful answer. And brachos. But what I want to say is, in the corporate world, this would never happen. If someone headhunts one of your top people in your company, and you hear about it, what do? You don't say, cheers, have a nice day. You make him a counter offer to keep him if he's good. You don't just let him go so easily. Here's the Rebbe. I'm working for Chabad. The Sydenham Shul is not a Chabad Shul. Today it's much more Chabad friendly than it was then, but the early years I had to walk on eggshells. The Rebbe is, so to speak, losing one of his personnel to another company. And he gives me a brocha. Not because I wasn't successful. Because the Rebbe cared for each and every single Yid. He wasn't just looking to build his movement or his organization or his company. Speaking about South Africa, I wrote an article, I think it was on the occasion of the 20th Gimmel Tammuz. It said that the Rebbe saved our community. You know, here in Australia, we've lost many of our South Africans to Australia, to Melbourne, Sydney even more so, Perth. When we came, my wife and I and 2 small children in 1976, the South Africans said, "You're mad. Why did you come here? We're all leaving. We're sitting on a volcano. This place can explode any second with blood on the streets like happened in other African countries when they threw off the yoke of imperialism of the colonial countries." When we started our Chabad school, the Torah Academy, we bought a big property in the northern suburbs, a very chashuv place. The leading establishment organizations came to see us, the 5 top Board of Deputies, Zionist Federation, Board of Education, IUA, UCF. to tell us to stop. There's the King David schools, which is like, what's the big school here? Mount Scopus. There was a yeshiva college there, which is actually the Mizrahi school. Hey, yeshiva college is Chabad, there it's Mizrahi. And they said, we have enough. We don't have room for a third stream of Jewish education. This one said there's not enough money. This one said there's not enough kids. So what did we do? Keep moving. We carried on doing what we're doing. You know what they did? They went over our heads. They wrote to the Rebbe an official letter signed by the chairman of the Board of Deputies, chairman of the Zionist Federation of South Africa, complaining to the Rebbe that we are a dwindling community and there's no room for a third stream of education, doesn't need it, we can't afford it, and that Rebbe should curb, quote, his errant emissaries from their reckless empire building, unquote. The Rebbe did not curb us. The Rebbe wrote back a letter. It's actually available online on Chabad.org. You can see it. A few-page letter, long letter in English, to those organizations, telling them that as lay leaders, they dafka have a responsibility to make sure that the South African Jewish community should not dwindle, because it's a very important community for many reasons. Just a few short weeks ago, we, Baruch Hashem, opened a new Torah Academy Girls High School campus in Johannesburg. We needed a new building. We built a beautiful new campus, Baruch Hashem. We just opened, mamish, fresh. And during the building project, there was a big billboard on the site. And the billboard said as follows: we cannot predict the future, but we can build it. And build it we did, Baruch Hashem. In the Maimer Ve'ato of the Tzava that the Rebbe left us with, speaks about the Raya Mehemna being not only the faithful shepherd, but the shepherd of faith, who gives emunah b'pnimius to every Yid. My friend Rabbi David Chazdan went to the funeral for the husband of the late Helen Suzman, who was a member of parliament for many years in South Africa, a liberal voice speaking out for the underprivileged black majority in the days of the apartheid regime. And when he came to do the prayers in her house, she opens the door and before she lets him in, she says, "Rabbi, I must just be honest with you. I don't believe in God." And Rabbi David had siyata d'shmaya, and he said, "That's okay, Helen. I don't believe in atheists." I had a top advocate, the senior counsel, Queen's Counsel, today King's Counsel, I think, who told me he's an atheist. He got sick. I would visit him and have long discussions about Yiddishkeit, belief. I put on tefillin with him. I'm this atheist. And then he says to me, "Rabbi, please send me the Shema in English phonetics. I can't read Hebrew. I like the Shema." At his hesped, I said, "You know, he was a lousy atheist." We believe that every Yid believes, and nobody believed that like the Rebbe. One of the Rebbe's well-known Chassidim was Rabbi Adin Even Yisrael Steinsaltz, alav shalom. Beautiful story of how he used to give a shir every week in Hebrew University, and all the professors would come, except one, a Holocaust survivor who was angry and refused to come to the shir. One day, Steinsaltz bumps him in the corridor of the university, and he invites him. He says, "Why don't you come? All your colleagues, all your friends are there." And the guy gets angry, and he shouts at Rabbi Adin. He says, "You and I have nothing in common. I eat chazer every Shabbos. So Steinsaltz was no fool. He says, if that's the case, then we actually have a lot in common. I keep Shabbos, and you keep Shabbos. We do it different ways, but I keep kosher, you keep whatever. You have your own dietary laws. Why are you eating chazer on Shabbos? Why don't you eat shrimp on Wednesday? Because Shabbos is a special day. And chazer is chazer treif. And you're being dafke. And you're angry. Why? Because you know that there's something there. If it was nothing, what are you getting angry about? To his credit, the professor was intellectually honest, and he rethought his position. And he came to the shir. And the rest is history. So the Rebbe believed in every Yid. And Tanya, as we begin, Perek Beis, V'nefesh Hashenis B'Yisrael Echel Kamimal Mamish. How many times did the Rebbe say that and focus on the mamish? Who is a Jew? What is a Yid? The pintel Yid, the nucleus, the core essence, that irreducible minimum, the pilot light that is never ever extinguished. And Perek Lamed Beis that tells us how to love another Jew. Don't just look at his nose. Don't just look at how his mother dresses him. Look at his neshama. And the Baal Shem Tov said that it applies obviously to a Jew on the other side of the world. And the Maggid Mezritch said even a Rosh Gomer like a Tzaddik Gomer. And the Rebbe was not looking for new members. He was not looking for customers. He was not looking for public relations. The Rebbe took Avos Yisrael beyond. I'm going to end with a story that you may have heard, but let's just clear my voice and say L'chaim. Please join me, L'chaim, L'chaim. It was the late 1940s. The Rebbe was still the Ramash. And he came down out of the lift in 770. Not everybody even knows there's a lift in 770. And he came into the front foyer, the opening of 770 upstairs, the original shul, original house. It's the late 40s, and there's two yeshiva bochum standing there schmoozing. It was probably lunch break. They would never be schmoozing during Seder, right? And who were the two? They were good friends of my dear father, Olav Shalom, Reb Herschel Folgerman of Worcester, Massachusetts, and Reb David Edelman of Springfield, Massachusetts. Then they were still Bochum. The Rebbe comes out of the lift. He had just come down from upstairs from the Friedrich Rebbe's apartment, and he says to them, "Ihr wilt hören a frische Wort von Rebbe? You want to hear a fresh, new word that I just heard from the Rebbe, my father-in-law?" He said, "Of course." So the Rebbe says, "You know my policy, my approach, that I am friendly to all Yidden, and I try to be Mekarev every Yid, even those who are not religious, even those who used to be religious, but when the boat came to Ellis Island in New York, they threw their tefillin overboard. I befriend them too," says the Rebbe. "But some of the ältere Chassidim, the old venerable Chassidim, older than me, are criticizing me and saying, Lo zu haderech, this is not the way. People who have thrown away their tefillin should be reprimanded, rebuked. Give them mussar." So I hear ältere Chassidim who I respect telling me that maybe my way is wrong. I thought, let me ask the Rebbe. I just came down from the Rebbe, and this was his answer to me. Friedrich Rebbe said, every parent loves every one of his children with an infinite love. But sometimes a child has a problem, a challenge. Health, IQ, educational, emotional. Special needs, we call it today. And the parent loves that child with an even more special love, with a unique love. They love every one of their children, but that child is a unique love. Said the Frierdiker Rebbe, Hashem is our Father in heaven, and He too loves every one of His children. But a child who has a special challenge, even if a Yid is spiritually challenged, his Father in heaven loves him with a special love. And the Frierdiker Rebbe told the Rebbe, you should continue to behave like Hashem. Continue to love every Yid regardless. And if a Yid is spiritually challenged, then love him even more. And indeed, the Rebbe went on to make this his mission for his whole life. It's not a secret, and I'm sure this community has its own challenges, like every Jewish community in the world, like every Frum community, like every Chabad community. We have children who have challenges. This one calls it off the derech, this one calls it that. How do we behave to our own children? The Rebbe taught us not only outreach, but inreach. To reach into our own and to love them unconditionally, regardless, and perhaps even to love them even more. My final story, directly related to this, happened at an educational conference in Israel. I heard it in the name of an old friend of mine from Yeshiva in Montreal, Reb Shaya Weber, who is a very respected mechanech, leading pedagogue in Israel today. And he told over of a educational conference in Israel where a Jerusalem cheder teacher shared the following story. He said there was a child in his class who was acting up in school because Nebuch, unfortunately, he became orphaned from his mother. Came from Meir Shorim. In that community, the almond, the widower, had a bunch of little children, and it didn't take long. It's brought down in halacha also that you could remarry. He remarried quite quickly. And this young boy, orphaned from his mother, with a new stepmother in the house, was not coping. And he was acting up in school. And he wouldn't listen to the teacher, and he was laying on the desk and sleeping, and the teacher didn't know what to do with him. How many times can you send a kid to the principal? Eventually he goes to the principal, he says, I'm at a loss, I don't know what to do. And the principal of this heimische Chayde in Mayashurim says, listen, we know he's a Yosim, it's Nebuch Rachmanis, but we can't handle it. Give him a frask. In Australia, what would he get? 30 years for that? But the teacher could not bring himself to administer corporal punishment on this little boy. So he tried to be more creative. So the kid is laying there on his desk the next morning, and the teacher writes him a note and puts it on his desk. 2 Hebrew words. Ma shlomcha. How you doing? Kid turns around, he sees a note from the teacher. He writes back an answer to the teacher. 2 Hebrew words. Ra li. Things are bad for me. The teacher writes back a 3rd note. 2 Hebrew words. Ani mevin. I understand. I'm not going to tell you that there was an overnight, immediate transformation. But something did happen from that correspondence. And the kid sat up. And the kid listened a little bit and participated a little bit more. And slowly, gradually, slowly but surely, he became a regular, functional member of the class. Many years passed, and the teacher is walking in the streets of Yerushalayim, and he sees a young man and woman, a couple, pushing a pram with a little baby, and he recognizes, this is that boy. And he stops, and they meet, haven't seen each other in ages, and they embrace. And it's just, I'm so happy to see that you've grown up and you got married and you're raising a family and you're doing well, Baruch Hashem. And the young man takes out his wallet from his pocket and opens a little flap, a pocket in his wallet, and takes out 3 crumpled notes of paper, opens them up and shows the teacher. Ma shlomcha, Rabbi, ani mevin. Whenever I had a difficulty, a challenge in my life, I looked at these papers and I remembered that somebody understood me and somebody cared. My friends, wherever we are, Australia, South Africa, Ukraine, Sderot, Gaza, or Lebanon, all of us can and must show the Rebbe's unique brand of Ahavas Yisrael to every Yid, regardless. Please God, may this Gimmel Tammuz, Shloshim Shona, inspire us all to follow the Rebbe's path and bring Mashiach now. Amen. L'chaim.
Thank you, Rabbi Goldman, for your thought-provoking words and for schlepping to this side of the world, although it's both the southern hemisphere, to Farbrengen with us. For those who would like to hear Rabbi Goldman again, there is an opportunity to spend Shabbos in Perth next week if you make the arrangements, where he'll be presenting over there. But before we draw this Farbrengen to its official close, I'd like to point out that an event like this does not happen in a vacuum, and I'd like to thank a number of people who were very instrumental in tonight's event. First of all, to Avram Analyst, because he really gets the lion's share for it, and Mel for supporting him in tonight's event. To Mati Rabin, YOSSY Herbst, the entire Young Yeshiva Committee, Dan Goldhirsch, and all the sponsors advertised on all tables, especially to Solomon's Kosher Butcher. We really appreciate their input. And of course, the most important hishtadlus, the most important partnership is everyone who came out tonight. And I just would like to conclude, we mentioned earlier the pasuk, Vayhi b'shloshim shana. It concludes, Niftachu hashamayim ve'era maris elikim, which, as the Rebbe spoke about, is revelation, which is of course what Mashiach is coming to bring into this world. We should be zeicher to the ultimate hisgalus with Mashiach, take of Miyad Mamish.